Hey everybody, Mr. Lavasser again with you, and I want to introduce to you a very important pattern in science writing, or really in any nonfiction writing, and that pattern is called the zigzag pattern. And what happens in the zigzag pattern is a little bit of the predicate becomes the subject of the next sentence. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I have an assignment for you. Would you please take that out now? Okay, so your assignment should look like this. The top topic, the scientific method, zigzag pattern. So we're going to discuss the scientific method about how we find information in nature as scientists. But I also want to introduce to you this writing pattern, which you will find again and again as long as you're reading science information or science texts. So if you've clicked here, you know that you are watching this video right now. And as always, you can start and stop the video as you need to. You can watch it again and again as many times as you need to learn this information. So I have an introduction paragraph here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to break the paragraph up into the zigzag pattern. Okay, and a friend of mine made this sample, and we'll be talking about it. And so the point of learning the zigzag pattern is it helps you recognize the important parts of a science text. When you read a science text, you can find the important things to study by recognizing what they have zigzagged. And also when you write, it's a way of making your writing improved. And what the zigzag pattern does is it condenses your writing so that every sentence is filled with information. And then I'll give you a little bit more of a demonstration, and then you'll practice finding the zigzag pattern at the bottom here, and I will add another video for you. So let's go back to the top. And I'm going to read this, and then I'll show you the zigzag pattern. There are several ways to analyze science writing to increase your understanding. One important way to analyze science text is with the zigzag pattern. Zigzag pattern connects and organizes ideas logically. The logical organization of facts and ideas is an important part of science writing and other forms of academic writing. Look at this science text about the scientific method. Science studies nature in a rational and systematic fashion. The system that makes science systematic is called the scientific method. The scientific method uses a sequence of steps to discover information about nature. There are 6 steps in the scientific method. 1, ask a question. 2, make observations and do research. 3, form a hypothesis. 4, perform a controlled experiment. 5, analyze data from the experiment. 6, interpret and report the findings. So I'm just going to take out the pen for a second, and I'm going to show you where the zigzag pattern is found in this text. And I'm going to change the color to, let's say, purple. And then I'm going to describe it more. So notice that at the end of this sentence, or the end of this idea or clause, there's the word systematic. And notice that the next sentence begins with the idea of the system. Again, here, the end, the system that makes science systematic is called the scientific method. Notice how that sentence ends with an idea or a topic, the scientific method, and the next sentence begins with the scientific method. So it carries that topic or that piece of information from the predicate into the next subject. The scientific method uses a sequence of steps to discover information about nature. And in the next sentence, we see there are 6 steps. And so what we're doing is we're tying one idea to the next idea, and it really condenses the amount of information that you have in one paragraph. And that's why when you read science things, they seem so full of information, because they are, and it's been done with this pattern. So let's read this again, and we'll look at those zigzag patterns. Science studies nature in a rational and systematic fashion. The subject is science. Is the subject. And the predicate studies nature in a rational and systematic fashion. Subject science, predicate studies nature in a systematic and rational fashion. Some piece of that information or predicate is taken and then made into the subject of the next sentence. Science studies nature in a systematic and rational fashion. The system that makes science systematic is called the scientific method. So we have the Zig, system that makes science systematic, is called the scientific method. And then the ZAG, we take the scientific method and turn it into the subject of the next sentence. So a subject, science, is introduced and developed. A piece of that information becomes the next subject, right here. I should use red for that, right here. The system that makes science systematic is called the scientific method. The pattern repeats, with a piece of information becoming the next theme or subject. Scientific method brought down here, and it becomes the next subject. The scientific method uses a sequence of steps to discover information about nature. And look, we find that a sequence of steps was brought down, and we see it here in the sixth. Even though this is not the subject, we see that that idea was still brought down into the next sentence. And look again at another example. The scientific method is a general description of scientific thinking. So what should be the beginning of the next sentence? This way of thinking. We have the scientific thinking here in the predicate, and then we zag that down here, this way of thinking. And this way of thinking becomes the subject of the next sentence. This way of thinking allows scientists to critically study and solve scientific problems. An example of what? An example of critically studying and solving scientific problems. An example of a problem might be, why does the door make noise when it is opened or closed? Well, even though it's not using those exact words, the next subject is this problem. What problem? The problem of why the door is squeaking. This problem may be investigated by observing other doors and making detailed comparisons between doors. Well, what does the next sentence begin with? The next sentence begins with this comparison. And where does that come from? It comes from right here, making a detailed comparison. So they've brought this idea down and made it into the new subject. Once you have this comparison may lead you to the hypothesis that the door handle is squeaking. Once you have a hypothesis, the next step will be to perform a controlled experiment. Well, hypothesis, hypothesis. They've brought that idea down into the next sentence. And that, my friends, is the zigzag pattern, because it goes like this. Zig, and then we have this idea, and then we zag that idea down into the next sentence. Zigzag pattern. And so you can't really see the zig and the zag unless you break up sentences into individual sentences, or more accurately, into individual clauses, which I've done in these two. When you see it as just a paragraph, the end of one sentence will be tagged to the beginning of the next sentence. And that's how you see it when it's in paragraph form. All right. Thank you for your attention. And we'll see you on the next little video about helping you learn how to do this yourselves.